Hi everyone. Thank you for joining us on the final session for PID Awareness Week. I'm Louise Lazzarino, Deputy Ombudsman at the New South Wales Ombudsman, and I'm joined by Paul Miller, who is the New South Wales Ombudsman. And we're just going to share some reflections over the past week. Paul, we had around 650 people attend the online virtual sessions. We had 7 online sessions during the week with a range of really diverse and interesting panellists. And I was just thinking that one of the things that came across was, especially because a lot of the panellists were leaders in their organisation, just the importance of speak-up culture and setting that tone from the top. And in particular, I guess there was this concept of, and you spoke about the centrality of culture, and I guess that culture is built over time. Did you have any reflections about that?
Yeah, I think that's right. And I think it has been interesting that the culture and leadership has been probably the key theme through each of the sessions, the importance of it. And the thing about the PID space is that most public officials will go through their entire careers without ever having to make a PID. They won't witness wrongdoing that will require them to make a PID, but it is possible for any public official in any role to find themselves in a situation where they might need to make a PID. And the question they will be asking themselves is, what do I do? Am I safe to do this? And the answer to that question is not really about, I'm going to go and look at the PID Act and see what the PID Act says. It's about what is the culture of the organisation that I'm in? How confident do I feel based on what I've seen this organisation and my leaders do in the past to make a report and know that they will have my back. And so I think it is right that this week has really highlighted the importance of culture and leadership from the top in this space.
Definitely. And Assistant Commissioner Peter Cotter from the New South Wales Police Force, he spoke about the fact that the police force, of course, since the Royal Commission has undergone rapid cultural quite a big cultural shift. And he spoke about the challenges of having quite a young workforce coming in and actually not having any knowledge of the Royal Commission because they wouldn't have experienced it, and just, I guess, the importance of having that historical context.
I think that's right. It's a reminder for leaders of the need to continuously reiterate messages, even if you think that you've sent the message to your organisation about your attitude towards a speak-up culture. Doing that once is not enough, including because you get new generations coming in all the time.
Absolutely. And then one of the other key features, obviously, of the legislation, but it was raised throughout the sessions, was this concept of no wrong doors. And of course, we know that it's a feature of the new Act. However, it also reinforces that concept, I guess, of the role of managers as well. And I thought you might be able to talk about that.
Yeah, I mean, this is operationally, this is perhaps the most significant change from the 1994 PID Act. That 1994 PID Act really did rely on whistleblowers themselves to be able to navigate the system and ensure that their disclosure was about the right thing and went to the right recipient. That's really flipped on its head in the new 2022 legislation, where the onus now is really on the agency, the recipient of the PID, to make sure that it's identified as a PID and then it gets to the right recipient. That's a huge challenge for agencies, and I think I hope at least that one of the messages that people have taken away from this week is that the 2022 Act in this regard is not a continuation of the 1994 legislation, and there's a lot of work that agencies should have done already, but certainly should be continuing to do to make sure that managers across the breadth and diversity of the public sector are aware of their responsibilities under the PID Act.
Absolutely, and it ties in really nicely to that, I guess, natural relationship that people have with their supervisors and their managers, and just recognising that that's often the first person that you might go to.
That's exactly right. The whole ethos of the legislation is how do we make it as easy as possible for people to report to the person or persons to whom they would find it most natural and comfortable to approach.
We heard about, I guess, that speaking up obviously takes courage, and it can be quite a significant event for someone to do so. And that's a point that was made quite specifically in the session that you were in with Chief Commissioner Hatzissagos from the ICAC. And I was really interested to hear his comments about acknowledging that it's a daunting thing for someone to do, but also encouraging people to do so, and his comments around there also being an issue where people have an obligation to report but don't.
Yeah, I mean, it is a good point in that no matter how strong the protections are, and no matter how confident we might be about them, making a PID is inherently a confronting thing, because you're effectively, usually, reporting wrongdoing that you've seen in your colleagues' behaviour, and so it does take courage to do that. I think the thing about public servants, though, is that we all come to public service because we want to do the right thing, because we want to act in the public interest, whatever our role might be. And the important thing is to recognise that making a PID is part of that. It is about acting in the public interest. So I echo the Chief Commissioner's call on public servants to really be courageous and to stand up and speak up when they do see the wrong thing.
Something that you spoke about quite a bit when we spoke about protections was that confidentiality is so central to this whole process, and probably one of the best protections that we can provide people.
It absolutely is, and where it's possible to maintain confidentiality, it certainly should be, and the Act directs that happen. One of the things I think is important, though, to bear in mind is that there is not an absolute protection of confidentiality for PID makers under the Act. So I think agencies who receive PIDs do need to be mindful of not giving PID makers a false expectation that their identity will necessarily and in all circumstances be kept confidential, because there may be some circumstances where confidentiality cannot be maintained and that other risk mitigation approaches need to be taken. But as you say, as a first line of ensuring that PID makers are protected, confidentiality is absolutely key.
Yeah, and I think the practicality of running an investigation, for example, and when you have to put evidence and information to people who are under investigation, the reality is that sometimes you do have to breach confidentiality just so that you can conduct the investigation. And I think sometimes the advice we provide is think about it as providing as much information as you have to conduct the investigation, but not taking that as a carte blanche that you then reveal all the information. Yeah,
and it raises a good point about the PID Act is really, as you would expect, very much focused on the people who make PIDs. So it's about protecting those people. It doesn't say a lot about other people who may be involved in an investigation, for example, including the person against whom allegations may be being tested. And the reason for that is that the PID Act itself doesn't establish the regime for investigating PIDs, and it is that regime that sets out the requirements around, procedural fairness for the person under investigation. But that doesn't mean that those protections for those people are not just as important.
That's right. And people obviously still have an obligation to know the case against them, and,
exactly.
and to be able to give their version of events. Okay, you spoke a bit about the support that we're looking to provide to whistleblowers through our new support team, and Assistant Commissioner Peter Cotter also spoke about that, because they have a similar process in place for their internal witnesses. So I thought it might be a good opportunity just to reiterate what we're doing in that space as well.
Yeah, it's it kind of comes back to the courage point and also the confidentiality point that even in circumstances where there is no threat of detrimental action or concern about the possibility of detrimental action, having made a PID can be an isolating experience for people, because generally speaking, in order to maintain confidentiality, you as the PID maker are instructed appropriately that you shouldn't be out there telling everyone that you've made this PID. So you then have this information that you know that you can't share with your colleagues, you can't share with your friends outside of work, and so inherently it can be a quite isolating period in people's careers where this is happening, and so support, I think, is important, and there are different elements of support. There's support in terms of support in navigating the PID Act, understanding how the regime works, what will happen when you've made your what will happen when you've made your PID, what information you'll be provided, what information you won't be provided. There's also potentially legal support that you might need in terms of understanding the what would happen if detrimental action was taken against you and how you would deal with that. But there's probably more commonly the kind of support, broadly speaking, psychological or just kind of pastoral support that I think whistleblowers really crave. And part of our establishing a whistleblower support unit is to provide, yes, referral if people need referral to particular types of support, legal support, or even specialised counselling or what have you, but also just to provide somewhere where you as a PID maker can speak freely about your experience of what's happening and have a sympathetic ear.
Yeah, and I think just being able to talk to someone who's independent of where you work and just giving you that external kind of viewpoint as well,
yeah,
can be
and
really
just
helpful.
The understanding that you're not alone. That even though it might feel like you're the first person who's ever made a public interest disclosure, that is certainly not the case. You're not alone. There are processes in place to support you.
Yeah, excellent. I think it's a really good opportunity also to just talk about some of the awareness and training obligations that agencies have. Obviously, as a result of this week, there is a plethora of resources available for agencies to use. These videos are on YouTube. We've provided other resources previously. But if you just talk about, I guess, the importance of the training.
Yeah, I mean, it's essential, and I had a meeting this morning with a secretary of a department who had just completed the mandatory e-learning training that we've rolled out for all senior executives across the public sector, and he made the comment that although he was very familiar with the 1994 Act, had been a very seasoned senior executive, it was only when he'd done that mandatory training that he really realised what a significant change the 22 Act has brought about, and has prompted him to think about the need for actually more bespoke training that's required for his department. So I think yes, training and awareness is absolutely essential. As we spoke about earlier, the no wrong door policy means that responsibilities are now distributed much more broadly across an organisation. It's no longer the case where you can say, well, I've got, a handful of disclosure officers, and so long as they know what they're doing, we're okay. Now, all of your staff who are in management roles need to be very familiar with what a PID is and what to do when they receive one. But there's also responsibilities under the Act, which is entirely consistent with our comments earlier about building up a speak-up culture, of raising awareness generally among all staff about their ability to make a PID, when they might do so, and what will happen if they do.
Yeah, definitely. So probably a really good opportunity to remind everyone that if you do need access to the resources and you're not quite sure where to find them, or you'd like some training, you can send us an email to pid@ombo.newsouthwales.gov.au. We have a whole PID unit who can either provide advice or access to resources or additional training. That's probably all from me. Did you have anything else to add?
No, nothing except to thank you all for joining us for our very first PID Awareness week. We hope that you've enjoyed and learned a bit from this week's sessions. If there's one message that I would sort of encourage people to take away from the week, it is that even though we talk a lot about how the new PID Act is different from the old PID Act and that responsibilities are dispersed, PIDs are not something to be frightened of, either as a PID maker or as an agency that receives them. They are an incredibly valuable tool for maintaining the integrity of the public sector and ensuring that we all continue to act in the public interest.
Yeah, absolutely, and I think just recognising that PIDs can be a barometer for your organisation, and the fact that people come forward being indicative of a positive speak-up culture.
Indeed.
Okay, thank you very much.